From WBUR, Boston, and NPR, I'm Anthony Brooks, in for Tom Ashbrook, and this is On Point. For decades, we've told our daughters they can be anything they want, a rocket scientist, a mother, even president, defy conventional roles. But do we do the same for our sons? We tell them to be tough, not to cry, tamp down their feelings. But some social scientists say to truly level the playing field, we have to give our sons all the choices we give our daughters. This hour On Point, a new playbook for raising healthy, happy boys. Push back against traditional stereotypes. Joining me now from Portland, Oregon is Claire Kane-Miller, a New York Times correspondent who writes about gender, families, and the future of work. You can read her piece, How to Raise a Feminist Son, at our website, onpointradio.org. Obviously, I read your piece, but let's just focus on the title, How to Raise a Feminist Son.
I know it's a loaded word, and I defined it in the piece very simply to mean someone who believes in the full equality of men and women, full stop. None of the other baggage that's attached to that word. Really, it's how to raise a person who is kind and confident in pursuing their passions. For 2 decades or more now, we have been telling our girls that they can be anything they want to be, and it's really come up a lot again during the presidential election because we had the first woman running for president, and Donald Trump's candidacy raised a lot of questions about gender and how we treat women as well. So there's been a lot of talk once again about how we raise our daughters. But our sons are different. We don't tell our sons that they can do jobs that have been traditionally feminine. We're not encouraging them to pursue a wide range of hobbies. We talk about sports, we talk about breadwinning, and we also talk a lot about showing that you can be tough at all costs. And that requires a lot of tamping down your feelings of vulnerability or sadness that everyone feels. And we don't really allow boys to feel that. Or on the other end of the spectrum, we tell them to tamp down their so-called boy energy, to sit still in class. And there's a lot of constraints that we put on boys that we often don't think much about.
One of the things you say in the article is that we don't raise boys to succeed in the new pink economy. What do you mean by that?
If you look at the fastest growing jobs in America right now, they are predominantly done by women. And I don't mean like 55%. They're like 90% women. Jobs like nursing and other kinds of healthcare aid jobs. The fastest shrinking jobs in America right now are almost all done by men. These are jobs in manufacturing and industries like that. So if men are going to succeed in the new economy, they're going to have to do some of these jobs that have been traditionally feminine. But it's not just about those jobs. There's been some good research done that shows in all jobs, including office jobs, the traits that matter most these days are traits that we've traditionally assigned to women, things like flexibility and cooperation. So even in a job of a CEO, which is a traditionally male job, those that are paying more and growing faster are jobs that have these traditionally feminine traits. So it's about encouraging our boys and not just our girls to have those traits and to think about that kind of work.
You make the point that this is an effort to improve a world that makes it better for both men and women, girls and boys. You say that women's roles can't expand if men's roles don't expand as well.
Exactly. Women, as we know, have entered the workforce in great numbers in the last decades. They do a lot of the things that men used to do. Men do not do the things that women used to do, like the housework and the childcare. Even in families in which both parents work full-time, the woman does considerably more of the housework and the childcare. So she's not going to be able to succeed at work and to put the time and effort she needs to put in outside the house if she also has all that work inside the house. That's what I mean by women's roles are never going to be truly equal until men also change their roles.
We have begun to raise our daughters more like our sons, and this is very good, but we are less likely to raise our sons more like our daughters. An answer is raising boys to raise children, whether or not they have children. Girls are raised to raise children, whether or not we have them. So we develop qualities necessary to raise children that are wrongly called feminine. Patience, attention to detail, empathy. But it's harder for boys to develop those qualities wrongly called feminine because they are not aggrandized.
That's author and longtime feminist Gloria Steinem from a 2015 interview with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. She's getting at one of the points you're making, right?
Exactly. Caregiving is a really important task for humans to be able to do. It doesn't matter if you intend to have children. If you do, we all know that men are doing more with children in this generation, so that's a useful skill to have. But we also know that our parents are going to age. The baby boomers are going to age in large numbers, and they're going to need a lot of caregiving. We know that we need to be able to take care of ourselves, that men and boys need to be able to live independently independently and take care of themselves, both before they're married to a woman and also after they're married, and even more in the economy. The caregiving jobs, the ones I mentioned, like nursing and healthcare aides, those are the fastest growing by far. So it's a very useful skill for boys to learn.
I want to introduce Christia Spears Brown. She's a developmental psychologist at the University of Kentucky and the author of the 2014 book, Parenting Beyond Pink and Blue, How to Raise Your Kids Free of Gender Stereotypes.
It's really been backed up by a lot of developmental research that's been going on for the past 20 years that we've done a really good job leveling the playing field in many ways for girls. We really teach girls to be assertive and athletic, and we allow girls a whole range of skills and abilities and traits, and we compliment them when they have this entire range of being athletic and being smart and being able to assert themselves. But for boys, both parents and their peers really police them if they step at all outside of this very narrow range of what the traditional boy is. So the boy that likes to read gets teased at school. The boy that wants to play with the doll, his dad might discourage it. So although we allow girls this full range of human emotions and abilities, boys, we've continued to be really, really constrained in a really 1950s kind of way, even though the world has continued to change.
How has thinking about all of this evolved over the years?
In one way, the women's movement of the 60s was really fantastic for research for girls. Girls had been long neglected in research, and for the past 30 years, researchers really paid attention to girls. And really, we've only been recently looking at, well, what are the costs for boys? So, for example, the past 10 years, research has looked at boys and some of the teasing that they get and the bullying that they get for anything mildly atypical. And so research is now starting to address that, but it's really because girls lag so behind in so many things. Traditionally, that's where the research really was, because they were most at risk. But now we realize, oh, girls are doing pretty okay. They're doing well in school. They're going to college at really high rates. But now boys are having a lot of these risks that we've long ignored.
One piece of advice that surprised me most is talking about stereotypes. I was sort of under the impression that if you just showed your kids an equal world in your household and in what you expose them to, then that's what they'd pick up. So if they saw Hillary Clinton giving a speech running for president, then they would think, of course women run for president, no big deal, and there's no need to say anything else about that. Talking to these researchers really showed me that I was wrong. It's that no matter what boys hear in their households, they are picking up on stereotypes as early as age 3. They really get them. They get what society tells them. They get what their peers are telling them. They get the messages in marketing and everywhere else, media, and they know those stereotypes. And so I was surprised to learn that you actually should call them out and say, you know, Hillary Clinton's giving a speech for president. This is the first time any woman has gotten this close to the presidency. I wonder why that is. Do you think that's fair? And really teaching them a new way to look at those stereotypes.
This is On Point. Valerie is calling from Cambridge, Mass.
I have two boys now, 20 and 23 years old, and when I met my 20-year-old girlfriend, she said, "Thank you so much for raising him a feminist." And I was taken aback because really I thought I just raised him not to be a jerk. But it was really true. I raised him as a feminist, and as I've been listening to your panelists, it is true. We talk frequently about why various things weren't true. Like, why is it just now that a woman is running for president? Why is it that, racism exists? And I think they're both tied together, actually. And they do recognize their white male privilege, and that makes me very proud every time they do that.
I'm struck by Valerie's definition of what it means to raise a kid a feminist. Don't be a jerk. She also talked about calling stuff out, and this is one of the things that you recommend. Be very direct with your kids and sort of point out the stuff that might be stereotyping them.
When we get to the point where treating women respectfully and not being a jerk, we don't need a label for that. We don't need to call that a feminist. We can just call that being a good person. That will be a victory when we get there.
That's what we always talk to parents about, is that really it doesn't have to be this big political statement. It's really focusing on what are the traits that are going to make this person a good partner when they're an adult, a good employee, a good parent, and how can I foster those in my kids regardless of what their gender actually is. Focus on skills that all humans should have. We want all kids to be empathetic because those make good adults. We want all adults to have perspective, being able to affiliate with others and ask their opinion about how they're doing. Those are all things that we foster in girls, and so we just have to also focus on that for boys. And this is a point that Claire was also making. Part of it's helping kids understand that these are really gender stereotypes and helping kids have language for that. And then saying, if kids say stuff to you, they don't understand what gender stereotypes are. So help your kid explain to others, because if they have a language for it and they recognize if a kid teases me, it's because they're biased, this is their problem, not my problem, helps kids also feel agentic and powerful in dealing with those things. Part of it's helping kids know you're actually right. You're going to be the well-developed, happy adult. These kids don't understand what you know. And helping the kid feel powerful about the choices that they're making and recognize that it's the other person's limitations, not their own.
My kids are very young, and so I'm not saying I'm an expert on parenting at this point. A lot of the people that I interviewed said, life is hard. People get teased, and it's going to be about different things. If it's not the pink backpack, it's going to be something else. So giving them some grit and some resilience to stand up to those things and the confidence to be who they're going to be, whether or not other people approve, is a good lifelong skill above and beyond any sort of pink or feminine things.
I want to turn to Michael Thompson. He's a clinical psychologist and the supervising psychologist for the Belmont Hill School. It's a private day and boarding school in Massachusetts with about 440 boys in grades 7 through 12. He's also co-author of the 1999 bestseller Raising Cain, Protecting the Emotional Life of Boys, and several other books on that subject.
There's much in this piece I agree with. I read it in the New York Times. I wrote a book with Dan Kinlan in 1999, and we talked about helping raise more emotionally literate boys. If this article had been called How to Raise an Empathic Son, How to Raise a Son Who's a Good Person, I would have had no objection. But I don't like the concept of how to raise a feminist son, because there's no equivalent on the girl side. You're going to raise a patriarchal daughter? No, we talk about raising an assertive girl, a courageous girl, a girl thinks she can do anything. But the feminist son politicizes it, and Claire's tried very carefully to define feminist as meaning believing in equality. But it doesn't play out that way on the ground, and I'm in schools every week. And there are teachers who say, oh, the boys are competitive and that's bad, and the girls are cooperative, that's good, and the boys should be more cooperative like the girls, and then everything would be better and they'd be better in the workplace. And there is a kind of subtle bias, a subtle mistrust of boy development. I find that teachers and parents very often don't see cooperation in boys. They only see competition, they only see bad behavior, and they think that has to be fixed. And for me, the feminist son suggests that we're going to fix them early and often so they turn out to be better men.
What are you seeing in terms of what they need and what they might not be getting from society? What's the need that's there?
Dan and I talked about it in Raising Cain back in 99, that they need a full emotional life. They need permission to feel everything. But saying to boys, it's okay to cry, means they stop crying immediately because you've called attention to it. You have to treat boys as if they have a full spectrum of emotions and a full spectrum of desires. Happily, there are many fewer parents who are reacting if their son is interested in wearing something pink or playing with a doll. And in that way, we are treating boys better, and we are enlarging the role for them. Nobody's ever been disturbed by a girl who played with a truck or put on her father's tie. We've never freaked out about that. And so I think we're doing better in that realm. What boys need, however, they often don't get or feel they don't get in school. And that is the last thing on Claire's list. Celebrate boyhood. If you interview boys, they say the teachers prefer girls. If you interview third grade girls, the girls say the teachers prefer girls.
If feminist boy is too freighted with politics, what's the better term?
How to raise an empathic son so he isn't a jerk. We want to raise boys to be good men, but we can't use a feminine ideal. I'm old enough, so I went through the androgyny movement of the 70s, how we should all be more towards the middle and mixed. And then in the 80s, I sat in seminars where men were supposed to get in touch with their femininity. There is a subtle undertone, which is a disparagement of masculinity. And boys between 3 and 4 separate from girls for purposes of play, and incidentally, girls separate from boys. It's all documented by Eleanor Maccabee in her wonderful book, The Two Sexes. The sexes split into gender-exclusive groups for play and for identity. That stays that way until puberty starts to come in 5th or 6th grade. And they do a lot of separate stuff. Trying to force boys to be friends with girls, Professor Maccabee showed, does not work.
He and I agree. I've interviewed him several times and read his research and think it's fascinating. You can debate the use of the word feminist, but it seems that boys are being told not to do a lot of things. On one end of the spectrum, be as tough as you can. Do not be emotional. On the other end of their spectrum, sit still. Be more like a girl. And those are very different people telling boys to do that. So on both ends of the spectrum, they're being told not to do something. And my argument is celebrate and let boys have the full range of who they are.
Oh, I absolutely agree with Claire on that. The argument about girls' schools was it was a big tent and every role, from the most caring girl to the most competitive, aggressive girl on the sports field, could be filled in a girls' school. But the same thing is true of a boys' school. I work at a boys' school. Our artists, the people who do our community service efforts, the boys who go to Franciscan Children's Hospital and attend to sick kids. Do we have our athletes? Yes. Are they venerated? Sure they are, because society loves boys' athletics. But you can create a space in which boys fill all the role, and that's what I want for boys. It's what I want for girls.
Let's go to Sarah, who's calling from Coffeyville, Kansas.
I don't want to raise a pansy, someone that's kind of sissified, because I want a man to be a man. I don't want him playing with Barbie dolls and stuff like that.
Sarah, why not?
Because they're men. They're supposed to be boys. But, yes, they should be empathic.
And I think you put a point of view on the table that I'm sure a lot of people share out there.
The reality is that saying boys should be boys is ignoring that there's more variation between individual kids than there are between boys as a group and girls as a group. So the reality is that gender's really kind of not that relevant to who kids are naturally. And research shows that. The individual variation is much more powerful than the gender difference. There is an entire range of boys out there. Some boys are going to be the rough and tumble masculine types of boys. That's just who their natural state is. Other boys, though, that's really uncomfortable for them. They are much more emotionally sensitive. They're going to be much more verbal. They're going to be much more focused on others and others' perspectives. And that's what's natural for them. And so I think trying to kind of force boys into this one small little narrow category of being a certain kind of boy is really not doing that boy any service.
I've been a child psychologist for 35 years, and I've met many boys and men who grow up to be gay, who are drawn to things that were more associated with female life. And the idea that you could force that boy to be something other than who he is. Christy is right, that you have to focus on the individual. When boys have those kinds of interests, or, as it turns out for some of them, sexual orientation, you're being cruel to them or trying to force them to be, it simply doesn't work. It just makes them miserable. And so if Sarah wants men to be men, she can find some. But we also need male elementary teachers, and we need men who care, we need male nurses, and we need men to do a wide variety of roles.
Is the world ready for boys if they're not going to be boyish boys?
Well, I think we make up the world, right? The world wasn't ready for a lot of the changes that the world now accepts. We make the world ready. But what's good is that all kids have a whole range of traits and abilities and skills. That's what they naturally have. Women like people that work hard and also are handy and all of those things. No woman ever complained that my husband's really good at processing his emotion in a way that's healthy for him and for our relationship. We don't complain about those traits in men. These are things that really are good for all humans. The less we can talk about feminine and masculine and just talk about what's a good trait and attribute to have as a person, then it becomes less politically charged.
What I want people to do is for people to trust boys. You have to give them chores, as Claire says in the article. You have to get them to care for themselves. You have to model parenting by both parents. And you are doing the most important thing that can be done for your boys, which is you're giving them care. It's been shown in longitudinal studies that the paternal variable that's most powerful is whether the father is engaged as a caretaker. So you don't need to preach to kids. You just need to provide them with the appropriate kinds of models, and you are doing that for your sons by loving them up.
Let's go to Jesse, who's calling from Akron, Ohio. Jesse, you're on the air.
There's a cultural component of this that is missing somehow. This is really an American conversation. What made me think of that is we have a new son in the family who's from another culture, very competitive, but also extremely empathic.
It's extremely culturally based. There's less biology and more socialization at play. We socialize the differences we see much more heavily. I mean, there are some biological differences, but it's largely culturally driven. You see also differences in Scandinavian countries, partly because they have much better parental leave policies, so the dads are much more likely to stay at home for longer periods of time and help with that early child care. And so there you also see differences in the way gender plays out in childhood and in adulthood because of the ways in which the society supports dads being involved and the types of traits it values. And there's other cultures that value affiliation and cooperation much more, particularly a lot of Asian cultures, more broadly speaking. And so you see those skills and those attributes valued in adults. We don't really value that as much, really, in women or in men. And so you see less of it here. But again, it points to the fact that these aren't really hardwired differences between boys and girls. They're cultural differences that we foster from the moment that babies are born.
I'm Anthony Brooks, in for Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point.